welcome to next in our series of author talks with Mr. Brian Tarallo, author of Surviving the Horror of Online Meetings.
Hey, Rachel, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I like it how this is, a series of author talks, and this is something, we've been adding those, and Brian was not going to do his own book, and I was like, I mean, you have to do your own book. You wrote one. So I'm going to go ahead and start with asking the question, actually two questions, why a book and why this book?
Yeah, so this was a book to learn how to write a book. I had written one book before, which was something of a biography, but it was really, just kind of a family project. It wasn't meant to go anywhere. I feel like I have a couple of other books in me about the practice of, about the visual practice. And so I thought that this would be a very safe topic to explore. I was working on this, like full disclosure, I was working on this before the pandemic, but the pandemic did put it into overdrive.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I just felt like it was one of those things where, if you'd ever done an online meeting, and Trent and Heather and I worked for the same company, and we just started playing around with Zoom like in the early days, and it was like at best it was sort of like an awkward conference call, and with video where sometimes and you'd spend most of the time like really checking to see if the hardware was working more than anything else, right? And so I really wanted to put this book in the world because I think it was really needed, especially in the early days of the pandemic when people were trying to figure this stuff out. Because I was afraid that people kind of just figuring out online meetings, it was going to lead them to a place where they didn't really like it. That it was like, we don't like online meetings. Well, you hear the same things about meetings in general, because people don't put really the thought and intention into design for in-person meetings. And with online meetings, the risk is that people are going to point to the technology as the barrier, rather than just the same dynamics as that leads them to not like in-person meetings. And so I wanted to get it out there so that people would have something of a survival guide to get through these online meetings.
Yeah, no, awesome. Yeah, and actually, so I was rereading your book just before this, kind of prepping for it, and writing in it, and I have like a list of kind of just things. I really liked your point about amplifying behaviors, and I think you kind of mentioned that there, where it's like, actually just tell me what you mean by that, about like how the virtual amplifies behaviors.
Yeah, so the thing is that I think that there's a hyper awareness of the kinds of dynamics that you see in regular meetings when you're in a virtual meeting. And because the thing is that if just think about the layout, for example, if we're all seated at a boardroom table, I can see maybe the people that are right in front across from me. I've got some awareness of the people that are to my side, but I'm not seeing everybody. With a virtual meeting, especially if everybody's camera's on, it's like I'm looking dead into your face, right? And so there's a real chance of misreading body language when you're in an online meeting. If people have multiple monitors, they could be looking dead at you, but they're sending the body language that they're not paying attention just because they're not doing that eye contact, even though they could be looking right at you. And so I think that there can be a hyper awareness and a hypersensitivity when you're in an online meeting, because you've got that weirdness of the eye disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, people can feel really awkward anyway in an online meeting because they feel like, okay, they're on camera, and who really likes doing that? And not knowing the platform, not knowing the technology, there's almost like there's awkwardness built into it. And so that just like ratchets up the sensitivity that people have. And it can be really, really hard to establish trust and familiarity and flow, so that people are, throwing ideas back and forth and, getting to that really high performance that you want to have in any meeting. It can be really hard to do that online.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think one thing you said there was trust, building trust online, and even like building trust in a physical room and in a virtual room, can be a bit of a challenge. But I like, if you have this equation, the trust equation, agreements plus experience equals trust.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so there's been a lot written about psychological safety, about creating safety. And first of all, why is trust so important in an online or an in-person meeting? I think that if you're not getting, if there's not high trust, then you're not seeing all sides of the beach ball. Let me just show you what I mean by that, right? So just happen to have this handy. If we're working together, right? If we're in the kind of meeting where there's a decision that's happening, you're going to have people with all kinds of different perspectives. And it's not just where they are, it's also their mental models, it's their experience, it's their framing. It can be literally what their senses are telling them. And so if you think about that thing that we're working on as almost like a beach ball, right? If you ask this guy, hey, what color is the beach ball? He's going to say, it's pink. And the first thing that everybody else thinks is, well, that guy's an idiot. How could it possibly be? From my perspective, it's green or it's blue or it's yellow, right? And so I think that the goal, especially if you're in a decision-making type process, is to get all sides of the beach ball. In order to do that, you have to hear everybody's perspectives. In order to do that, you have to have trust, because it's really, really easy for somebody who's just hanging out there to hear, well, the beach ball is pink. And the guy clearly says, well, not from my perspective, but I don't feel like I can say that because I don't think that there's trust in the room. I'm just going to kind of fold my arms and not participate in this, or I'm going to wait until the meeting after the meeting to actually say what's out there. So I think the goal of any facilitator should be to create a space for others to be successful, to create a space where everybody can put their ideas in there. And you can't do that without trust. All right. So I think that the way to do that in an online meeting, you actually have fewer tools available to you than you have when you're in the room, is again through the agreements and the experience. Okay, what do I mean by agreements? There's a lot of words for these. Ground rules. People say rules. I tend to get a little itchy. It's like, oh, there's a rule. Can I bend this, break this, get around this? So I prefer the word agreement. It's a little bit more of an adult thing to say. We have an agreement. We are going to be, for example, cameras on, or we are going to, use the mute and unmute as a way of signaling that we want to speak or not. Or we are going to practice curiosity or active listening, or any of those ground rules, principles, if you like, that you would use in order to just create that container of psychological safety. Those are the agreements. The experience, this one's a little bit more abstract, right? When I talk about the experience, what I mean here is that what is, well, let's say we're doing an in-person meeting, and let's say this is a big deal, right? We've got a hotel room, we've rented out some ballroom somewhere. We would be thinking about everything that these participants are experiencing. It's like, what's the signage look like, right? What are the colors that are used, right? What's the mood? What's the music that's welcoming people as they come in? What's at the tables, right? What are they seeing, hearing, sensing? And most importantly, what are the atmospherics, right? What mood do I want these people to be in as they're entering, participating, and then leaving, right? And so that's what I mean by the experience. What is the experience of these people? Now, in some ways, we actually can, we have a little bit of an advantage because virtual meetings are so visual, right? And so we have an opportunity to impact the experience right at the very beginning. So before the meeting even starts, like, what's that first thing that people see on the screen? Welcome. We'd like to invite you to, come into this space. Maybe clear a distraction that you've got, write a statement of purpose. Maybe there's a visual there, a piece of stock imagery, but everything that we show and everything that we show and say, even what we wear, the mood that we come into it with, whether I'm doing okay, this is going to be a strategic planning, and this is serious, and we've got to make some real hardcore, hard-nosed decisions here, versus, okay, everybody, welcome to the team building. We're going to get to know each other. You can shift your mood to reinforce that experience one way or the other. So that's what that trust equation is. It's the agreements and then the experience that you're creating for your participants.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I also think, one of the things I was reading about was, you talked about this a little bit, but you touched on this agreements versus ground rules, and those are different. And one thing I also really like about your book is that you I'm holding it up, but people believe they have it, but if not, you can order it. But you're very tactical things in there about you kind of set the container for, okay, this is why you want agreements, but then this is how to do it. And so I think your book is very, very actionable for people who maybe aren't facilitators, and they can pick out the pieces that they can use.
Yeah, I wrote it for anybody that hated online meetings. It wasn't, there's a lot of facilitation stuff in there. And so that if you are a facilitator, you'll be able to read between the lines. Like I don't call out, for example, Sam Kainer's divergence convergence, but that's in there. You'll see it. I call it like gathering supplies.
Mhm.
The metaphor being we need to shore up against the zombies that are attacking the house and all of that, right? I try to pull in kind of that 1950s campy monster movie motif through the whole thing. But it's in there. So even if you are a facilitator, you'll see some stuff. It's like, oh, okay, I can see where this fits with, this other discipline that's there. Heather actually dropped into chat full of silver bullets. Yeah. So every chapter has like one silver bullet, which is like one practice that you can do to take that particular chapter just like to the next level.
Yeah, I know. I actually, and I was one thing I have a couple questions about that, but
Mhm.
one of them was, I noticed in the book, and this is again pulling out, I've worked with you a number of times. So the idea of this is a book for, like you said earlier, like group decision making or team building.
Right.
And you kind of distinguish between like this is a book for like group process in a virtual meeting versus like presentation or things.
Yes.
Maybe just tell me more about like that choice or that conversation.
Yeah. So this was actually when I talked to a couple of people who were in I'll call it publishing just for the sake of I got a lot of pushback on the concept of the book, right? And they're like, well, there's not a whole lot here on how to deliver good presentations. I'm like, yeah, that's a terrible reason to have an online meeting, right? And they're like, what are you talking about? That's most of meetings. I'm like, yeah, why? If your goal is to transmit information to people, there's no reason to do that synchronously. There's no reason to have 300 people dialed into a town hall meeting so that they can hear the CEO. It's a terrible waste of time, right? If that was me, I'd be like, record the video and let me watch that while I'm taking the dog for a walk or doing the dishes or doing something else, right? And this is again, this is very early in the pandemic where I also was managing, 4 kids homeschooling, right? And everything else that was going on at the time. So I think that if your goal is to transmit information, there's way better ways to do that than to have an online meeting. Record a video, write a white paper, right? And give me something to read. I'll read it. Use the PowerPoint feature. A lot of people don't know this. You can actually record a voiceover on top of a PowerPoint. So if you got a lot of information you want to transmit, there's tons of better ways you can do that, but don't do it in an online meeting. It's a terrible waste of people's time. And I would also say you can be a lot more efficient if you're taking the time to record a video, because it's like, if it's going to be a video, then you're gonna practice, right? You're probably going to say it in front of the mirror a few times. You're going to write something. You're not just going to speak off the cuff, right? And it will be a much more efficient use of time. By the way, I get the irony that right now you and I are talking in front of 16 people who are dialed into this. But yeah,
I know it's funny. Like as I was doing that, I'm like, this, but it's interesting because like this is an author talk, and that's kind of like the way it was framed. And this is maybe getting a little bit meta, but the way it was framed was a little bit more of a conversation, author talk. So not necessarily a workshop, but
not a keynote, right? Not a presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, no, it's another one of my favorite silver bullets was right in that section about saving group time for group work.
Yes. Yeah. So saving group time for group work. I think so as a facilitator, one of the things I'm fond of saying is that my job is 95% done before the meeting ever starts, right? All of the time spent doing design, discovery, all of that, like just getting to the meeting, that's most of my work. By the time I actually get to the meeting, it's like I click the button and we're off and running. Sarah, I like you. I'm glad you like the background. I'll send it to you if you want to use it. In the same way, I got distracted by ask me the question. What was it?
Well, you were talking about 90% of the work that happens before the meeting starts.
Yeah, but what'd you say before that? Because I was going
saving group time for group work.
Right. Okay, thank you. Needed that. So just as an example, Amazon has got this really great practice. Okay. So there's usually read aheads and they send it to people ahead of time. And they say, before we actually get to the meeting, we want you to be up to speed on what it is that we're going to talk about, right? We don't want to spend a whole lot of time during the meeting getting people up to speed on this. So like, read this report, check out this white paper, bring yourself up to speed now, and then the meeting starts, right? Now, they also allow that not everybody has had the chance to do that. So they put about 10 minutes at the front end of every hour-long meeting to, read the thing if you haven't already done that, so that everybody's well read and they're ready to get started on this thing. And if you've already done your homework, great. You can do whatever you want to. You can catch up on email. You can do basically whatever you want to. So I think in the same way, let's say that we're talking to a client, right? And they're like, okay, we have this annual meeting, and we do want to do some strategic planning. So there's going to be some decision making in there. We do want to do some brainstorming. We do want to say, all right, here's our top 5 initiatives. Oh, and by the way, the CEO wants to kick us off with a 30-minute presentation just to set the tone. Okay, great. Yeah, let's do all of that, and let's take that 30-minute presentation and let's package it up in such a way that people will want to check it out before they actually get there, so that we can save group time for group work, right? So let's do all of those things, but rather than having people sit for 30 minutes and listen to something, which is going to put them into passive receive mode, they're not going to be in active engage mode. If you really want this thing to be participatory, let's not kick off with a 30-minute presentation. Let's say, okay, we're going to treat adults like adults, do your homework, and then show up ready to work.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great context. And I think it's one of those things that once people get a hold of this book and they start reading it and they're like, oh wait, a lot of this makes sense, and like I can apply it. And also like, oh, like, you're talking about the publishers earlier saying like, where are the presentations in this book, and like just people changing the mindset so people can pull things out and just do things differently.
Yeah.
And one thing another kind of thing I really like about this is the kind of the phrases, I guess. So be technology agnostic, and then favoring technique over technology.
Absolutely. So I started doing virtual facilitation back in around 2016. Long story short, what happened was I live in the DC area. I got stuck in this terrible traffic jam and missed a meeting downtown. And I was like, okay, there's got to be a better way to do this. So I started, researching virtual facilitation. And I found that Rachel Smith, formerly of the Grove, was getting started with this class that she called Facilitating Virtual Collaboration, right? And she was using this tool at the time that was called Board Thing, okay? And Board Thing is kind of this funny thing where this is going to sound really familiar, but you move these electronic digital sticky notes around, right, in this shared space. And that was the answer, right? Like we had it. That gave us everything we needed. And for some reason, like Board Thing started having these problems. Like it got a lot laggier, it started glitching a lot more. And Rachel, I ended up like co-teaching with Rachel a few times. She said, hey, there's this new tool out there. It's a little different than Board Thing, but it's kind of cool. It's called Mural, right? And so it was like, oh yeah, this is even better, right? So the point is that when we actually started teaching the class, it was done on WebEx. Of course, we shifted to Zoom just because it's a better platform. So the idea with being tech agnostic is there's new stuff that's always coming out, right? Trying new things, right? Not getting hooked on one tool. And even if, here's the reason. I love using Zoom. I love using Mural. And I have clients all the time. They're like, oh yeah, we're a Microsoft Teams company. We use Microsoft Teams. It's like, great, I know Teams, and I kind of go in, holding my nose with Teams because it's not meant for facilitation. But it pays to know them just so that you can be agnostic and float in and out, right? So that's the tech agnostic thing. What was the other part of your question?
Favor technique over technology.
Yeah, so here's the thing. It can get really easy to get, you can become a mural wizard without a whole lot of work, right? It's not hard to be just, to take, especially as a graphic facilitator, you can do templates, you can do sticky note exercises, you can do dot votes. I would say there's not much that you can't do on Mural that you can do in the room. It's really easy to port your process over. Having said that, there are a lot of participants that, for reasons that we discussed earlier, it can be a little off-putting. They get overwhelmed by Mural, especially if you've got 200 people that are all adding sticky notes at the same time. There's no way you're going to be able to synthesize all that stuff. And so the awkwardness that comes just because technology is technology, and people have different thresholds for what they can handle, right? Is why I think that technique is better. And I think I said this in the book, but I would rather a good facilitator with a good process and a webcam in front of them and a flip chart behind them. I'd rather they have that than the fanciest piece of technology out there.
Mhm.
Okay. Technology will not compensate for good technique. You have to have that first.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think that's something that we all, just in general, kind of get stuck on. Like, I always like I was to teach a class, and I was like, the app is not actually the solution. The app is usually like the medium. And I think that's the same. Like, the technology is maybe not the solution. It's like the delivery system. It's the medium. It's the way that we're just connecting, and it's a way to do that. So I just really love that point there.
Yeah.
Another thing I really like, like I'm like picking the things that I want to talk about from the book. There's a lot of good stuff in there. But one of the things is when you talk about decision making and just moving this a little bit more, maybe out of the book, but moving from inquiry to advocacy.
Yeah. Okay, so this is, let me tell you where this comes from, by the way. So I'll just tell you this. So this is, we're getting inside Brian's head for just a second. Actually, can I draw? I think I'd like to do a little bit of drawing. All right. Let me fire up some PowerPoint. By the way, I'm about to share what this is going to sound terrible. I think that this is the only way to use PowerPoint, is to use it like this here. So let me show you something. Let's go like this. Yeah, why not? Okay. So we're gonna get into Brian's brain for just a second. So the way that I think about facilitation really is that it's sort of like a bicycle. Okay. Let me just go ahead and sketch this out. So, bicycle, what's a bicycle? Bicycle's got two wheels. And the front wheel, you could say that, well, actually, let's do the back wheel. So this is why we get together. This is where the drive is. This is the task. Okay. So there's the task side of things. This is like, okay, we're here to do a strategic plan, or we are here to, come up with our business plan or our 5 bold steps or whatever that's going to be, right? So there's the task side of things. Then there's the human side of things. Okay. And by the way, this is in the human side. That's where trust is. Okay. That's where communication is. That's where interpersonal relationships are. That's just your sense that you have in the room. Like people talk about sensing, getting a sense of the room. That's the human side. And by the way, the concept of human and task, that comes from William Dyer. Okay. Now, so this is, by the way, this is not in the book, but this is just how I think about any facilitation. I try to pay attention to both of these things. And the reason for that is that it's really easy to get like out of balance. What happens if you're all task, which it seems like a lot of, meetings are designed to be like this. It comes at the expense of the human side, right? So I think it's important to have balance, and that balance is really dictated by the client's culture. How much are they into human? How much are they into task? And really, I spend a lot of time trying to emphasize this side, because most of our clients, they want to be back here. We're here to get things done, right? So where I'm going with this is that on the task side, when we're talking about decision making, well, that's really divergence and convergence. And if you want to know about that, check out Sam Kainer's book, The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. He's got everything you need to know about divergence, convergence, right? This is the brainstorming. What if we did this? What if we did that? What if we did this? What if we did that? And then coming up with the criteria by which we're going to decide against those ideas. And then actually applying that criteria to say, okay, we're not going to do this. We are going to do that. And then, here's our plan, our way ahead. So that's the back wheel of the bicycle, right? Now the front wheel of the bicycle, I think this is where the human stuff comes in. This is David Cantor's book. Whoops, let me spell it right. David Cantor, who wrote the book Reading the Room. Okay. And what he talks about is this thing called the 4-player model, which you can use to diagnose what people are actually saying in the room against different speech acts. I'm not going to go into all of them right now, but one of them is along the line of advocacy, which is saying I want, or in some cases I don't want, right? And then the line of inquiry, which is the line of understanding, right? This is about, we're going to talk about this, we're going to converse about this, we're going to ask questions about this, or we're going to back each other up, we're going to follow each other on this. So in my mind, when I'm facilitating, I'm watching for what's happening at a task level. Okay, are we diverging here? Are we brainstorming, or are we making decisions? And I'm also going to look at what's happening from a human level, right? Are we more on the line of inquiry or advocacy? And it's real easy to get stuck on either one of those two.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I mean by that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm like, I like how you just pull it out and draw again, going back to the tech agnostic, and sometimes the best tool is the one you use and can deliver the technique.
Yeah.
I also like that, this is, very beginning of your book, like the very beginning is, where do meeting monsters come from? The answer is usually people, not necessarily the tech. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah. If you take a look at most of, by the way, let me show you where the book came from. Okay. So I mentioned that I used to train facilitating virtual collaboration. This is my file for that, right? And then anytime something happened, which was all the time, anytime something happened, I would usually grab a sticky note and write something down, right? And so I had this big, block of these things, just something that I'd learned every time I taught this class. Well, this is what the book turned into, right? And so I'm sorry, I got off track again. Ask me that question one more time. I was going somewhere, I forgot.
I was just talking about how people, the monsters come
People
from
think, right?
people.
So what happened was that we would open up that class with kind of a challenge statement and say, okay, what is it that you not like about online meetings, right? And here's what we'd get: people would show up late, right? People aren't paying attention. People get distracted. I don't know if people are actually paying attention. Yeah, and there was a common denominator pretty quickly. You can hear it. Very rarely was it actually just the technology that showed up occasionally, like not being familiar with it, but more often than not, it was the human factor that really led to people not liking online meetings.
Yeah, no, I think that's, and that's a good point. I think the underlying part of your book is like, here are a bunch of techniques and tips and strategies for setting up the container to support the people, so that the experience is, a good experience or a better experience.
I mean, I think that that's the goal. I think that technology is going to do what technology is going to do. There is a section of the book that says, okay, here's what to do when technology breaks down. And I've got a couple of workflows there. Like, have you tried turning on and turning off your computer? Some of the little stuff like that, right? It's going to do what it's going to do. I think that really our job is to try to create a space for people within that technology, right? I think if we're doing our job right, the technology should be transparent. You should forget about it. You should be able to just engage in the meeting like the way that you and I are talking to each other, right? It's like, it's like you're right there. I have there's a coach that I work with, and she says, online coaching anyway should be a lot better because like I am right there with you, I can send you every message that I'm right there and I'm completely 100% engaged with you. And sometimes that's not always the case when you're in person. If you're meeting in a coffee shop, there's distraction, there's other stuff that's going on. But in this environment, we can be like right there. I recently I've been teaching my teenage daughter how to drive, which is its own nightmare. And what's interesting is that it's interesting to watch her learn how to do this from a beginner's mindset, right? So she has to think about things. It's like, okay, I got to get in the car. I got to buckle my seatbelt. I got to put my foot on the brake. And then I got to turn the car on. And then, oh yeah, now I put it in gear. Why isn't the car moving? Oh, because my foot's still on the brake, right? Like she's got to think about all this stuff. Whereas me, like I'm getting in the car while I'm talking on the phone and eating a sandwich, right? And I'm driving down the road and I'm doing all of these other things and I'm not even thinking about driving, right? It's automatic. If you really want to geek out, Daniel Kahneman talks about the difference between system 1, system 2, the automatic stuff that we do versus the intentional stuff that we do. So I think if you're facilitating, the goal is to get the technology to a place where it's automatic. It's like driving down the freeway without having to think of it. And the further goal is to get your participants into that same place where they don't have to think about the technology, that it becomes transparent, that it's about what's happening in the space and not the space itself.
Yeah, no, I like that. And actually, so I'm going to like pivot a little bit here, but like going back to the beginner's mindset part, I'm guessing that like in writing this book, this was a bit of a beginner's mindset for you, right? So I'm curious, I'm curious about how did it get from that folder to this?
Right. So I gave up Instagram for a while, to be really honest. So what I did is, because I used to, it was just a habit thing. I'd read Atomic Habits and something like that. And I realized I had this habit, like as I was going to bed, I would, kind of browse on Instagram until I fell asleep. And so what I did was, I just opened up a Google Doc and I took most of what was in here and I did it just a quick outline of it. Right. And then I was, just as I was going to bed every night, I would, polish 1 or 2 or 3 paragraphs, um, so I had the manuscript, I had that. And it was really just working on it at night in bed on my phone, while I was going to sleep, which is probably why there's so many errors in it, as I'm drifting off and, the phone is falling into my face as I'm falling asleep. But no, it was really March when I was like, okay, I have to get this out now. I've really got to knuckle down and make this a thing. And it did take a while even after that to get it out, just because of like the editing and the layout, which I'm indebted to Heather for. I don't know if you know, Heather actually did the lettering all the way through it. She did the layout on it. Actually, if you've got it there, she came up with, so the horror, she came up with a lettering style that I absolutely love. Maybe if she comes back, she can explain it a little bit. But that was, based on this movie poster that I'd seen.
Nice.
But it was like the thing that surprised me is that writing the book was like 1/3 of the work, right? Then editing it and getting it ready to publish was like another 1/3 of the work. And then the thing that I didn't see coming is like marketing it was another 1/3 of the work, right? And it was like, it was that much work to get it done.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting thing. It's basically 3 different projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so actually, Sarah's question is there anything that didn't make into the book that you're bummed about?
There is, and it was the kind of thing I wish I had come out and actually just come out and said it, but I didn't. For whatever reason, I didn't put it into the book. And I think this is the best way to do this. So Peter Senge has got this thing where he talks about decision-making processes, right? And by the way, I've seen the Grove do this. I've seen a couple of other people do this. This can be applied to meetings. And the way that he says it is that there's basically 4 different kinds of meetings that are out there. Okay. By the way, I use this with all of my clients. I say, what kind of meeting is this? Right? You go back through any of my discovery notes, you'll see this in here. So there are those meetings that you could call this a tell. Okay. And by the way, not one of these meetings is better than another. We need this. So a tell, that is the purpose of a tell, is to inform or to direct or to instruct. And like I said, we need this kind of meeting, right? Like, Rachel, if I'm coming to you and you're about to teach me how to do CPR, we don't need to dialogue about that. We don't need to dot vote about what's the right way to do. You're going to tell me what this is. So we need this kind of meeting. Okay. And then there's what's called a sell. And the idea here is that maybe, I'm a leader and I've got this vision in mind. And I want you to get on the bus with me, right? Like I want to persuade you. So part of this is there's persuasion that happens here. And by the way, we do this a lot, right? Influence happens here. But my goal is that I'm going to dial into your favorite radio station, WIIFM. What's in it for me? Okay. And I want to, bring you up to speed on the benefits of this thing, because I want you to get on the bus with me. And then there's what's called a consult. Okay. By the way, sitting in a lot of meetings, most meetings, I think, fall into this bucket where it's a consult. And here what happens is that the leader has got an idea of what they want to do. And they say, okay, here's what this looks like at a 30,000 foot level. Tell me from your perspective, though, what does it look like at a 10,000 foot level or a 1,000 foot level? What are the gaps? Give me your advice and feedback, right? And so Rachel, just, the reinventing organizations, like the advice process, that fits right here, right? That's a consult, the way that it's set up. I'm still going to make the decision. You give me your advice and feedback, I will take it under advisement, but I'm going to be the one that ultimately decides on this thing. And then finally, there's a co-create. Okay. And the metaphor here is that we are coming into this space as equals. Okay. We all have an equal seat at the table. And it's our responsibility to, guess what? Come up with ideas come up with criteria for those ideas, and then make decisions together. Okay. I wish this had made it into the book, but I just for space, I didn't really have a spot for it. But here's how you use it. First of all, you have to coach your clients to resist the urge to fall into the trap, because this model does have a trap. And the trap is, oh, we want this to be a co-create. Oh, Brian, I'm a co-create kind of leader. That's the kind of person I am, and I want people to, it's like, okay, fine, good, sir, got it. And one of the worst things that you can do is to do a co-creative process, come up with a decision as a team, and then say, yeah, but we're going to go and do this thing anyway, right? That is the fastest way to erode trust on a team. If you're going to do something like that, if that's your goal, call it what it is. Call it a consult. There's nothing wrong with that. I want your advice. I want your feedback. This is going to be a listening session, right? And ultimately, I'm going to be the one that goes off and makes a decision about this. Once you've got a decision on this, then you can go back and you can tell people what nobody tells people, which is what their role is in the meeting, right? If we're doing a co-create, well, I need you to make some decisions. So you're going to be doing some deciding, okay? You're going to be ideating, you're going to be deciding. If we're doing a consult kind of meeting, then you're going to be sharing your advice and feedback. If you're going to be, if this is a sell kind of meeting, I want you to be persuaded, okay? I'm going to tell you the pros and cons. I want you to decide, but your role here is to be persuaded. And if it's to tell, then I want you to be informed, or I want you to be directed to go off and do something. Now, here's why this is so important. I think we have a lot of meetings, we invite a lot of people, but we don't actually tell them why they're there. Okay. And so people think, well, okay, what's my personal brand, or why do I think I was invited here? Well, I'm, PhD, so, I'm subject matter expert. So I got to tell, I have to elocute. Well, maybe, right? Maybe it's not just about giving some information. Maybe it's actually about making a decision. So if you tell people what their role is, I think that there's a lot of, this goes a long way to creating safety and to setting your meeting up for success. I would like to know why I'm being invited to a meeting. If you're going to invite me to something, like, why am I there? Right. But I think that there's a lot of presumptions that go into, why you're inviting somebody. Just be explicit about it. Hey, man, you're here to help us make a decision. Oh, and by the way, you are also going to be accountable for this decision. You are going to, Rachel, I'm thinking about some of the meetings that you and I have facilitated. Yeah. We're not just doing a strategic planning just for fun. It's not that somebody else is going to go off and do it. You're going to do this stuff. Right. And so this is the kind of meeting we're having. This didn't make it into the book. I wish it had. I think that this is so fundamental to good meetings.
Yeah, no, I think, and that's interesting because, having worked with you and this, I could kind of see hints of it, very kind of an underlying level. And I was gonna actually ask you about it, and you brought it up anyway. And also, I really liked that you were talking about the power, the power of being explicit with the roles and what you're expecting of participants, because I also was gonna ask you about that. So
yeah, I
love that. Yeah, so maybe Sarah's question about actually, so the art and artist, but also,
oh yeah,
before we get to that, I'm curious about how did you choose or happen upon kind of the theme, and what was it like to kind of write to that, or just the theme of that, and then the art and artist around that.
Okay, so I was we probably shouldn't record this, but that's all right. We'll just record it anyway. I was originally going to call this the Zombie Survival Guide. Okay. And I talked to my attorney about this, and he was like, you absolutely cannot call it the Zombie Survival Guide. That is an injunction waiting to happen. Absolutely not. You can't call it the Zombie Survival Guide. And I'm like, yeah, but I really like this kind of, I don't want this to be some dry business book. I want this to be kind of fun. And so I really kind of glommed onto the idea just from, the Zombie Survival Guide of, yeah, Casey's gonna, the Zombie Survival. Yeah, maybe they wouldn't have picked up on it if I'd called it that. But I really held on to this idea. And actually Heather's gonna remember this. So we used to play this crazy video game called Plants vs. Zombies, right? And yeah, Trent's holding his head right now, because we actually, Heather and Trent and I had this late night where I think Heather almost murdered herself, Plants vs. Zombies until 5 a.m. You tell the story better than I do. Heather, if you're there.
No, we're not recording this.
We're not recording this? Okay. Well, anyway, we were doing a retreat, and I introduced her to Plants vs. Zombies, and she stayed up like all night playing this stupid thing. And if you've never seen it, if you've never seen it, it's kind of funny. There's these campy, goofy little like zombies that walk around, and I just love the aesthetic of that, of these kind of like goofy, zoned, and like their eyeballs are doing sort of the Simpsons things where they're going in two different directions. I was like, man, I feel like that after online meetings. And there were some great quotes that came out of that, which Trent is sharing in chat right now. I'm not going to repeat them. But I just love that as an aesthetic. And I loved the whole like 1950s campy monster movie, like growing up with like Creature, the Black Lagoon, and Dracula, and Frankenstein and the werewolf, and some of those like original, like the Mummy, like some of those like, I just love those. My dad would show us those as a kid, and so I just grew up with those. And so I really wanted to pull that aesthetic into it. I'll tell you, originally I had invited Malgosia Kosteka to do the illustrations on it. Because if you take a look at her aesthetics, that it kind of fits that. She could do, these sort of kind of goofy little zombies walking around, and she actually did a couple of concepts, but she was switching jobs. And when she actually passed on it, I'm like, well, okay, the only person that could do it could be is Mark Monlux. And if you follow him at all, he is again a huge fan of like B movies. He's actually got this, just to put a plug in for him, he's got this obscure monster movie card deck. So he's got this deck of playing cards where every single card is this like weird movie. I bought his deck, and then like, oh, what is this from? Like I had to go and like actually watch the movie because he introduced me to it. So he's got kind of that campy vibe to it. And so he was the perfect guy to do the illustrations.
Nice. So I guess, do you have anything else you want to share, either about the book, like the contents, like the content in the book, or the creation of the book?
I would say if you're not willing to go and get a copy of it, which is perfectly okay. What you can't, yeah, Rachel's modeling one right there. What you could do is you could actually get onto the website, which is survivingthehorrorbook.com. And I've been slowly like portioning out pieces of the book in social media. So you can get most of the book if you want to wade through what's called the survival tips. So they're in there. There's also a couple of chapters you can actually download. One of the downloadable chapters is on just good online meeting etiquette, like basic stuff, which I still see people get wrong. I feel like, I have 4 kids, and it's like, okay, how often have we covered this? Please don't put your elbows on the table, like that kind of stuff. It's like that kind of pieces of etiquette, which, like be on time, just the basics. Yeah, the same kind of thing that you would do at an in-person meeting. You try to do that, when you're online too. So anyway, you can download the chapter on etiquette. That's there, and you can pretty much mine your way through most of the book through the survival tips.
Yeah, or you could just buy it and then not have to mine it, just like
it's on Kindle. By the way, Amazon, every now and then they decide to discount it. They don't tell me when they do that, but it shows up on discount every now and then. So check it out, Black Friday. I don't know if it's going to be a sale. Probably seems like they're discounting most things, but there you go.
All right. And so kind of my next question is kind of what's next, and also like what might you do differently in the next book?
Okay. Am I ready to tell this? Okay, fine. So I have to, seriously, it was a bestseller actually on Amazon. I had a very good publisher that I worked with, somebody who's really more of a consultant that really, really helped me out with the positioning on Amazon. So if anybody's thinking about writing a book and they want to be able to say, hey, this was a #1 bestseller on Amazon, I had a great person that I worked with that helped me work all of like the metadata stuff so that you could actually get that. Take some work. That's that 33% of marketing. But yeah, I can say that now. I'm traveling to the ATD conference. Forget what that stands for. Association of Training Developers. I'm probably going to get that right. Used to be ASTD. What is it again?
Talent development.
Talent development. That's probably it. It's ATD. It used to be ASTD, but I'm actually traveling to their conference in December just because of this book. So I've got some, speaking things that have come out of this, and it's kind of nice to be able to say, okay, bestseller. So if you're interested in that, if you got a book in you, let me know. I'm happy to connect you with Bethany of Publishing Partners. She's who worked with me. So the 2 books that I'm working on right now, I'm working on 2 of them. One of them is called Think with Ink, and it's my take on graphic facilitation. It's really diving into a lot of what I just, shared on the, like the bicycle is in there. And thinking about like, how do you actually use visuals to facilitate a group decision-making process, right? Including things like creating psychological safety, including things like visual energizers, including banks of questions that you can ask to move people from the line of inquiry to the line of advocacy and back and forth, right? So that one's Think with Ink, and I'm working on that one. The one that I'm working on simultaneously is called See Your Ideas. And this is one for designing rich visuals that communicate a story, right? So it's going beyond storyboards, going beyond infographics. This would be kind of close to, like, for example, a Grove story map, or like a root learning map, if you've seen those. But it's a rich illustration that's got it uses a system as a metaphor in order to really replace something like a strategic plan or a future vision. So I've already taught a couple of classes on how to do that. I've got a workbook on it. So I'm just taking that and I'm turning it into, something more like this.
Yeah. What learnings would you take from publishing this book and applying it to publishing these other books?
Yeah. I think these other 2 are going to be a little bit longer. I think that I wish I could have done more research on this one. Unfortunately, there wasn't a whole lot out there. When I wrote this one, I did my homework. I tried to reference as much as I could, but there was really not much on online meetings at all. There was a lot on teleconferences, and there was this, like, I found this old school thing called telepresence, which was kind of cool, where they would actually take like a TV, like a big TV, back in like the 90s, and they put it onto somebody's chair. And so I read this book on telepresence. I'm like, yeah, it's a little dated, but okay. And then so anyway, what I would really like to do is I'm slowing these 2 down to really spend my time on the research, to make sure that the activities and the techniques that are in them are really, really good. I'm trying to, rather than doing a lot of things, I'm trying to do a few things that are just bulletproof and work.
Nice. All right. I mean, that's kind of all I had. I think we covered a lot of stuff, and I really appreciate it. Does anybody
Thanks, Rachel.
have any questions they'd like to ask?
Yeah, should we open it up? You can go off chat, you can drop something into, or you can go off, nice. You can go off mute, you can drop something into chat.
Give people a couple minutes. And then I think the one question I saw while people maybe be doing that is what's the timeline for this?
Yeah, I saw that question. I'm ignoring it.
The timeline is undetermined, apparently.
Yeah, that's really hard. I really want to do this one right. This may be like the Mona Lisa. The Mona Lisa was never finished. Like he was. It wasn't done when he died. So I really, really want to get these 2 right. Dana's on, so she actually shared something. I think related to that dynamic, right? Like there's the book that you write because you want to learn how to write a book, and for me that was this one, right? And then there's the book that you really, really want to write, and that's the one that you put kind of your heart and soul into. So I'm on those 2 right now.
Yes.
Unfortunately, they take longer because you care more.
Yeah.
You have to do that in order. Do you have to write the book to learn how to write a book, and then you write your real book?
I think so. Dana, what do you think?
Totally agree. I feel like I worked out a lot of bugs about not only the content of the book, but the process of writing a book in doing the first one.
Yeah,
for sure. But some people are better at getting it right the first time. That wasn't me.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions they would like to ask Brian before we end our author talk?
I can't believe y'all hung out for an hour listening to us talk. That's amazing.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you, everybody, for being here.